Open statement.
Let's see. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back for a second day of hearing on Ms. Bondi's nomination for Attorney General. As I said yesterday, I want everyone to be able to watch the hearing without obstruction. If people stand up and block the views of others behind them, or if they speak out of turn, it's not fair or considerate to others, so officers will remove individuals as they have previously. We didn't have any of these problems yesterday. I don't anticipate it today, but I just think we ought to make everything pretty clear. Before we begin with opening statements from the panel, I want to go through a couple of bookkeeping items and explain how we're going to proceed today. I will give an opening statement and introduce the majority witnesses, and I'll give the opportunity to Senator Durbin to provide an opening statement and introduce his witnesses. Then we will turn to our witnesses for their opening statements. Following their statements, we will begin with the first round of questions in which each senator will have 5 minutes. Yesterday, we met from 9:30 until 3 p.m. so that every senator, both Democrat and Republican, could question Ms. Bondi. We heard from Senator Scott and Schmidt, who gave their strong endorsement of Ms. Bondi. Their introductions described her extensive experience, outstanding qualifications, and character. Yesterday's testimony showed that Ms. Bondi is certainly experienced and capable to serve as our nation's chief law enforcement officer at this very critical time. She is very well qualified for the position, serving 18 years as prosecutor and 8 years as Attorney General for the state of Florida. Florida, the third most populous state in our nation. She will enact desperately needed changes at a department that has been politicized and weaponized for partisan ends. With almost 30 years of experience behind her, she will restore both morale and law and order to the department badly needed, in need of strong leadership. Her commitment to the rule of law emerged as a central theme of our discussions yesterday, and as I made clear in my opening statement yesterday, that is what I believe the department in this country desperately needs. Today, the purpose is to hear from an outside panel of witnesses, and we're grateful that all of you are here this morning to express your views on this nominee. I will go ahead and introduce the 3 majority witnesses before I turn over to Ranking Member Durbin. First is Dave Ehrenberg. Until just a few days ago, Mr. Ehrenberg was the elected Democrat state attorney for Florida's 15th Judicial District. He served in that role for 3 terms since he was elected in 2012. Mr. Ehrenberg also previously served in the Florida State Senate and as a White House fellow in both Clinton and Bush administrations at the Treasury Department. He has known Ms. Bondi since 2010 when he ran to be the Attorney General of Florida, a position Ms. Bondi obviously won. Notwithstanding their political differences, Ms. Bondi appointed Mr. Ehrenberg to be her drug czar to combat the opioid epidemic, and through that work, he came to know Ms. Bondi very well. Second, we have Mr. Nicholas Cox, who is Florida's longest-serving statewide prosecutor. He has served in that role since 2011. In his capacity as statewide prosecutor, Mr. Cox focuses on cases involving human trafficking, drug abuse, fraud, organized crime, gang violence, cyber crimes, and crimes against seniors. Mr. Cox also previously served a member of the faculty of Stetson University College of Law, where he taught trial advocacy, consumer law, counseling and negotiations, and criminal procedure. Mr. Cox has extensively experienced observing Ms. Bondi's work as a lawyer and administrator. Ms. Bondi began her career as an intern in his office. While serving as Attorney General, she appointed him to his current office. Third and last, we have Sheriff Emery Gainey, a career law enforcement officer with more than 40 years' experience. Sheriff Gainey has served as a sheriff of 2 counties in Florida. When Ms. Bondi served as Attorney General, he served as her Director of Law Enforcement and Director of Victim Services. Through his work as law enforcement officer in Florida, Sheriff Gainey is very familiar with Mrs. Bondi's work with state, local, and federal law enforcement, as well as her work to address drug abuse, fight human trafficking, and victims of crime. Thanks, all of you, for serving. Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Chairman Grassley. I want to take a moment to reflect on yesterday's session with Ms. Bondi. There seemed to be a meeting of minds on criminal justice reform and the pressing need to protect our children online. Those are good things. There are still some outstanding issues from yesterday's hearing that I'm struggling with. Let's start with a very important issue. Who won the election in 2020? Why are we still asking that question? For goodness sakes, we moved on to a new election. You would think that'd be over. The reason why that's still a relevant question is it gets to the heart of our democracy. The peaceful transition from one president to a new president by the will of the people without resistance and without denial. Does the phrase hanging Chad have any significance to our witnesses? It does to me and to every American. In the year 2000, Bush versus Gore, there was a contest that went on into December and numerous court contests associated with it as to who actually won that election. There came a moment when Al Gore stood up and said, that's it, it's over. I've gone to court, I can keep going to court, but I don't think that's in the best interest of this country. I concede, George W. Bush won. You didn't hear Democrats at that saying, never say that in public, never concede that in public. We did. George W. Bush won the election because Al Gore decided to step out at a point when Bush was ahead, period. End of story. That is what a democracy is all about. One person concedes, the other person wins. We move to the next president and ultimately the next election. But that's not the case in the year 2020. We still have a candidate, in this case, President Trump, who's in denial as to what happened in 2020. And as a consequence, some characterize it a big lie, whatever you want to characterize it. It really is an important question because it gets to the fundamentals of anyone seeking a position in the cabinet of this president or serving our nation. Do they acknowledge the peaceful transition of power in 2020 from Donald Trump to Joe Biden? The answer is yes. The reason is we had the certification of the electoral vote. Senator Klobuchar remembers that well. And we went through the process we're supposed to go through in our Constitution. End of story. But yet when I asked that simple question of Ms. Bondi yesterday, she was unable to say just expressly yes. Joe Biden received more votes than Donald Trump and was elected president in 2020. Why is that such a hard question? I don't understand. Why couldn't she state it plainly that that's what happened? When a nominee for Attorney General is afraid to state a simple fact, then what does it say about the future of our democracy and the credibility of our system of justice? She not only refused to acknowledge President Trump's defeat in 2020, she also said, quote, there was a peaceful transition of power. Let me repeat that, a peaceful transition of power. Seen the videotapes? What happened here on January 6th? Can you imagine if the news came on and said, did you hear what happened in London today? A mob stormed the Houses of Parliament, crashed through the door of the House of Commons, took control of British Parliament, and we hope that the police can take control back in a matter of hours so they can continue their business. What would we say to that? In London, in England, they went through what? A mob storming the Houses of Parliament, knocking down the door? Incredible. Whatever happened to that country? We thought they were leaders in the world. Now reflect for a moment on January 6, 2021, and what we went through. All of us went through individually, being spirited out of the Capitol building, taken to a safe place because of a mob. That was not a peaceful transition of power. And I want to just say, Sheriff Gainey, thank you for joining us today. You may have noticed, we all noticed around here, we're not supposed to notice, we should, the men and women in uniform who protect us in this chamber and throughout these buildings day in and day out. God bless them. But what they went through on January 6th is an outrage. Attacks on them, several lost their lives as a consequence of what they went through. Many were forced into retirement, and hundreds of people were arrested for trespassing and much more serious crimes. Donald Trump characterizes them as political prisoners. The people who attacked our policemen are characterized as political prisoners, and he promises that he's going to give a pardon to all of them on the day that he's sworn into office. I asked a basic question of Ms. Bondi as the chief law enforcement officer, which she would be under as Attorney General. What do you think about the pardons? She wouldn't comment. Well, she made it clear she stood behind the police, but you can make them clear by saying to Donald Trump, this is a bad idea. Anyone who is guilty of violence, certainly guilty of violence, should not be pardoned on the day that you're sworn in as president. So I was at least disappointed by her answer. And then this Kash Patel issue. Kash Patel, I'm going to meet him next week for the first time. I've read an awful lot about him. There's an awful lot to read. He has a lot to say, and he said it, and he's published it in book form. One of the things he said is that he has an enemies list. Secret police agencies throughout history have an enemy list. The American FBI does not and should not. I think there's serious questions about this man, his judgment, and his political values that he would bring to office. Yesterday, Ms. Bondi embraced him as a person's right for the job. I certainly don't feel that way. He's going to have to convince me. So there are questions raised. Having said that, I want to concede two things. First, if I were setting out to hire an attorney, she certainly has the strongest resume and should be hired. Number two, the testimony today, particularly from people of the opposite political party in Florida, is a testimony to the fact that she's been bipartisan and very effective as Attorney General. I will concede that point. When she talks about the things she achieved, I'm impressed. I should be. But the question is, when Donald Trump knocks on her door as Attorney General, and he will, if you question that, ask Jeff Sessions or ask Bill Barr, he will knock on her door and ask her to do something that's going to be a challenge ethically or morally. It's just his nature. He views that office as an office he personally controls. He doesn't. The American people and the Constitution control that office, and we have to resolve whether or not Ms. Bondi is a person to be the next Attorney General. Our first minority witness is Lisa Gilbert, co-president of Public Citizen, a nonprofit organization with more than 500,000 members. The organization has an extensive record of investigating conflicts of interest in public corruption, and Ms. Gilbert will speak to the dangers of confirming someone with corporate interest as Attorney General. Second witness, Mary McCord, Executive Director of the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection. She's a visiting professor at the prestigious Georgetown Law Center. Prior to these roles, Ms. McCord served for nearly 20 years as Assistant U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, also served as Assistant Attorney General for National Security from 2016 to 2017, and Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General from 2014 to 2016. Mr. Chairman, at this point, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. You know, we have this tradition of swearing people in regardless of how honest you are and everything like that. So please rise. Would you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. I've seen all of you say yes to that. Thank you very much. And now you may proceed with your statements, and we'll start with Mr. Ehrenberg and just go across the table that way. So please start out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Durbin, Senators. In 2010, after serving 8 years as a state senator in Florida, I ran for Florida Attorney General. I faced a fellow state senator in the Democratic primary and one of 3 Republican candidates in a potential general election. Pam Bondi was one of those 3 candidates. This was her first run for political office, and she was the only candidate in the race on either side whom I did not know. At our first candidates forum, she came up to me with a big smile and told me her younger brother, who may be here today, Brad, worked with me at my old law firm as a summer associate and had very complimentary things to say. That was vintage Pam Bondi. My potential future opponent immediately disarmed me by ignoring partisanship to reach out to me as a human being. Pam won her primary, and I lost mine. I then endorsed my Democratic primary, who faced her in the general election, and then Pam won that election too. Despite the fact that I was on the other side of the aisle and did not support her campaign, Pam called me to offer the position as her drug czar to combat the opioid epidemic that was ravaging Florida and to shut down the state's ubiquitous pill mills that fed the nation's addiction. She offered me this position because she knew from the campaign that fighting the opioid epidemic had been my career priority and an important part of my campaign platform. It did not matter that I had a D after my name. She believed I was the best person for the job, regardless of party affiliation. I accepted the position and received a little pushback from my side of the aisle, but nothing compared to what Pam Bondi received. At a party event, one county Republican chairman was so angry that he wagged a finger in front of her face to condemn her decision. He didn't argue that I was unqualified, just that she was resurrecting a Democrat's political career who had just lost badly in a statewide election. On that, he may have had a point. I served as drug czar, though, for 2 years and then got elected as a Democratic state attorney for the next 3 terms, 12 years until last week. But you don't wag a finger in Pam Bondi's face and get away with it. Pam's kind and genuine and loves people, but she's also tough as nails. Pam met this guy's fire with fire, putting her own finger in the party leader's face to defend her new employee, and she didn't care that I was a Democrat or that she didn't know me that well at the time or that one day this could help me run for office, which it did. She didn't do it because she one day hoped I would have her back at a Senate confirmation hearing. It was just the person she was and still is. When A.G. Bondi and I began our anti-pill mill initiative, 7 people a day were dying from prescription opioid overdoses, and there were more pain clinics in Florida than McDonald's in Florida. A year later, she convinced a reluctant Republican legislature to pass crucial, long overdue reforms, including a prescription drug monitoring program that dramatically reduced doctor shopping. A.G. Bondi used her bully pulpit and her bipartisan relationships to get it done. Today, Florida's pill mills are no more. The steady stream of cars from Appalachia that constituted the OxyContin Express are a distant memory, and countless lives have been saved because of our state's days as the drug dealer for the rest of the country is an ignominious part of our past. Pam Bondi and I have always had our political differences, although that has never come between our friendship. I supported the presidential campaigns of Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris. I've been outspoken on cable TV and streaming channels on a host of legal issues, including with Professor McCord, including the dangers of targeting one's political enemies. I was critical of the Durham investigation, which led to questionable criminal cases and embarrassing acquittals. A prosecutor's job is to follow the evidence and the law without fear or favor. Pam Bondi is a 20-year prosecutor who understands this. Even if she does something as Attorney General of the United States that I disagree with, I believe she will always remain tethered to the law. And there are some important issues where she and I are in complete agreement, such as the need to stop the flow of deadly fentanyl that has become by far the largest killer within the ongoing opioid epidemic. We agree on tough punishments for those who engage in the modern-day slavery known as human trafficking, and for laws that allow victims to have their low-level crimes expunged and to utilize the T-visa program when needed. We agree on the need for treatment courts, which have proven to be a better alternative to incarceration with a lower recidivism rate for many nonviolent drug offenders. And we agree there should be a stronger response to the growing number of anti-Semitic incidents in our country, and especially on college campuses. Senators, I'm grateful for the time to speak with you today and look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Chair Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm Lisa Gilbert, co-president of Public Citizen. Public Citizen is a 54-year-old nonprofit organization with 500,000 members and supporters across the country. We champion the public interest in the halls of power, working to ensure that our government and our economy work for the people, not for wealthy special interests and corporations. On behalf of our members, we stand in opposition to the nomination of Pam Bondi for the role of Attorney General. The mission of the Department of Justice is to work on behalf of the American people, keep our country safe, protect civil rights, uphold the rule of law. Unfortunately, Pam Bondi has numerous troubling potential conflicts of interest from her time as a lobbyist, which call into question her ability to hold corporate wrongdoers accountable. I'll focus my testimony on our concerns about this problem. Public Citizen recently examined the federal lobbying disclosures and Foreign Agents Registration Act reports filed by Bondi and Ballard Partners, her lobbying firm. Our review showed that her client list is full of controversial clients, some of which stand to benefit directly from having their former lobbyist in charge of the DOJ. Over the last 5 years, she represented 30 clients, from large corporations and contractors to a foreign government. In addition, during her earlier time as Florida Attorney General, a recent New York Times review found several pieces of evidence that seem to demonstrate her general tendency to assist corporate allies and corporate lobbyists' strong belief that Bondi was exceptionally accessible to lobbyists and amenable to the agendas of their corporate clients. Bondi had a large number of domestic clients, but today I'll highlight just two. Geo Group, the nation's largest private prisons company, and Amazon, an e-commerce giant. Bondi was registered to lobby the first Trump White House in 2019 for Geo Group. Both DOJ and DHS inspectors general have been critical of prison management of Geo Group, and they stand to profit substantially if the Trump administration's new immigration detention and deportation policies result in filling empty or underutilized beds in their facilities. As a real precedent for this concern, Public Citizen did research back in 2019, which showed Geo Group's contract dollars rose by over 40% in the first 2 years of the Trump term. Now to Amazon. They're, of course, a very well-known tech company. Bondi was registered to lobby for them in 2020. In recent years, they've been investigated by the DOJ over injury rates and workplace safety at their warehouses, been referred to the DOJ by a bipartisan group of lawmakers for potential criminal obstruction, and had their robo-taxi unit federally investigated over safety concerns. In addition, DOJ and the FTC recently reached a settlement with Amazon regarding children's privacy violations via Alexa. And of course, Amazon also receives multi-billion-dollar contracts from multiple federal agencies, ranging from DoD to NASA. Beyond these examples of potential domestic entanglements, Bondi was registered as a foreign agent, lobbying on behalf of foreign governments and officials. To highlight just two, Bondi worked for both the Embassy of Qatar and a Kuwaiti investment firm. For Qatar, the goal was the improvement of their often criticized human rights record before the 2022 World Cup. For the Kuwaiti investment firm, the work was an attempt to free a Russian money manager arrested in Kuwait on terms of embezzlement from her and her staff to the tune of tens of millions of government funds. So, to conclude, we believe a person with this deep record of controversial business and foreign government lobbying should not be considered for Attorney General. A well-functioning DOJ needs to be tough on corporate crime and work to improve the lives of our communities. This level of corporate entanglement just speaks to exactly the wrong incentives. During the first Trump term, corporate enforcement plummeted at the DOJ, and we really fear a repeat of this pattern. Public Citizen, to that end, recently created a tracker of ongoing federal investigations that are at risk of being dropped or weakened or modified. The tracker includes 237 investigations, which has cases against 192 distinct companies. Shockingly, nearly 1/3 of those companies have known ties to the incoming Trump administration. And as highlighted throughout my testimony, Pam Bondi is no exception. To be clear, we do not think that this level of corporate alignment can be addressed simply by recusals. Bondi's broad representation of and lobby registration for corporate interests is much more than a list of potential conflicts. It instead represents an overall sense of prioritization. It's a net of potential conflicts that there really isn't a realistic escape from. If her nomination as Attorney General proceeds, we are really concerned that she will take actions that reflect the needs of these types of entities. So with that, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to present the views of Public Citizen and welcome any questions.
Good morning, Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, and members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify before you today on behalf of the United States Attorney General nominee Pamela J. Bondi. My name is Emery Gainey. I am a 40-year career law enforcement officer who has served at all levels of law enforcement, to include the sheriff of 2 Florida counties. It has been my distinct pleasure and honor of knowing and working with Ms. Bondi since 2010. As a member of her senior executive staff, I served as the Director of Law Enforcement, Victim Services, and Criminal Justice Programs when she assumed the office of Attorney General in 2011, and I continued to serve in those capacities through her 8-year tenure as Attorney General. To this day, we maintain a very close professional, personal, and family relationship. I want to speak this morning on Ms. Bondi's commitment to the just and proper enforcement of the law, demonstrated through her well-earned relationships with local, state, and federal law enforcement partners throughout the United States. During her service as a prosecutor in Florida's 13th Judicial Circuit, Ms. Bondi had well-established, deep-rooted relationships with local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. Upon becoming Attorney General, she immediately began the process of meeting all law enforcement leaders throughout the state of Florida to establish partnerships to ensure that our citizens and visitors to our state receive the most effective law enforcement and victim services available. One critical issue that she immediately took on was the emerging proliferation of deadly designer drugs, specifically those referred to as bath salts, that our state had been facing prior to her being elected as Attorney General. Ms. Bondi called together our stakeholders, to include prosecutors, law enforcement, our Office of Drug Control, our state lab directors, and many others, to not only seek to understand this new trend in our state, but to seek immediate solutions to stop the spread of these deadly substances that were taking the lives of our citizens. From these stakeholder meetings, she developed a strategy and a call to action to immediately outlaw these dangerous bath salt substances. Utilizing Florida's rule-making statutes and bipartisan support from Florida's legislature, she was able to permanently ban the sale of these deadly drugs, despite the continuous efforts by those who altered their formulas in order to circumvent Florida law in an attempt to keep multiple versions of these harmful substances on some of the shelves of some of our retailers. These actions, in conjunction with our public and private partners, begin to effectively address a growing trend in illegal substance abuse in our state. Ms. Bondi's commitment to the rule of law was also evident in her taking the lead role investigating and prosecuting crimes involving gang activities, organized retail theft, human trafficking, and a host of other criminal activities. She demonstrated her deep commitment to keep and restore the lives of victims of human trafficking through her leadership on Florida's statewide Council on Human Trafficking by investing in and supporting safe houses for victims. She also partnered with multiple private businesses to help combat human trafficking in both the sex and label industries by establishing a zero-tolerance toolkit to train their staff in identifying and reporting suspected cases of human trafficking. I want to now focus on her compassionate side of her tenure, where she was and remains a staunch supporter of crime victims and crime victim rights. One of her roles as Florida's Attorney General was the delivery of crime victim services. The Florida Attorney General's office was the recipient of and administered the third largest annual award of federal crime victim compensation funds, in addition to the state of Florida crime victim funds. Ms. Bondi dedicated a team of experienced victim advocates and crime compensation professionals to work with our local governmental and non-governmental agencies to ensure crime victims receive all the benefits allowable under state and federal laws. Her personal compassion was constantly on full display when meeting with crime victims and their families. I stood beside her at crime scenes when she visited victims in hospital rooms, at family relocation centers, at conferences for victims of crimes, and many times one-on-one in her offices. She demonstrated her commitment to fairness and justice by not only rigorously seeking to hold perpetrators of crime responsible for their acts of violence, but she also demonstrated the same level of passion, care, and empathy for those innocent citizens who found themselves, through no fault of their own, a victim of some of the most horrific crimes committed by individuals against fellow human beings. Mr. Chairman, the United States of America and the American people will be well served by confirming Pamela J. Bondi as our next United States Attorney General. Thank you.
Distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify about the importance of the independence of the Attorney General and the Department of Justice when making investigative and prosecutorial decisions. Before my current position at Georgetown Law, I served for nearly 20 years as a federal prosecutor under Republican and Democratic administrations, and 3 years at Maine Justice, first as Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and later the Acting Assistant Attorney General for National Security. I stayed through the transition into the Trump administration before leaving in May of 2017. I do not know Pam Bondi. I am here today to speak because of my long career at the department, my reverence for the department and its mission, and its independence. The lawyers and law enforcement officials at the Department of Justice are critical to preventing the weaponization of the department and preserving impartial adherence to the rule of law. For the Attorney General, this means taking seriously their oath of office, which is to the Constitution, not the President. It means recusal if their impartiality regarding any particular investigation or case could reasonably be questioned. And it means reaffirming long-standing policies limiting contacts between the department and the White House on specific investigations and cases. The oath to the Constitution means that if there is inconsistency between what the President may ask the Attorney General to do and what the Constitution requires, the Attorney General must choose the latter. Although she is a member of the President's cabinet and therefore expected to implement the President's policy priorities, her duties are limited by the Constitution. That means, among many other things, not targeting people or associations for investigation or prosecution based on protected speech or association, not executing searches without a warrant, not denying the equal protection of the law to all people within the United States. It also means that any prior role as part of the President's legal defense team is over once the oath of office is taken. The Attorney General is not the President's personal attorney. She is the attorney for the United States. When President Ronald Reagan nominated William French Smith, his former personal attorney, to be the Attorney General, Smith was asked during his confirmation hearing how he proposed to ensure that his former relationship would not compromise his independence. Smith responded, "I would have to be very conscious of situations where it could appear that because of that relationship, a problem might be created." Smith recognized that legitimate concerns might require his recusal in certain cases to avoid the appearance of impropriety. As relevant to Ms. Bondi, her work defending President Trump during the first impeachment proceedings and public statements she has made about potential prosecutions of those involved in cases against President Trump could create, at the very least, the appearance of a lack of independence if she were to open investigations into people involved in those matters. Similarly, any involvement in any civil case against the DOJ, a civil case against the DOJ, about which President Trump's attorneys have given notice and which seeks more than $100 million for alleged rights violations arising out of the Mar-a-Lago search, could reasonably raise concerns about Ms. Bondi's impartiality that could only be addressed through recusal. In 1978, 4 years after President Nixon's resignation after Watergate, Attorney General Griffin Bell established the first of what has become known as the department's White House contacts policy. It has been reaffirmed by attorneys general under both Republican and Democratic presidents ever since. The DOJ policy recognizes the tension between protecting the department's independence in making decisions about criminal and civil law enforcement while also preserving the president's ability to perform his constitutional obligations to take care that the law be faithfully executed. The policy thus bars the department from advising the White House about pending or contemplated enforcement actions subject to limited exceptions while permitting communications about the advancement of the administration's policies. Just as in Bell's time, in order to insulate those who initiate and supervise law enforcement investigations, such as line prosecutors and their supervisors, communications with the White House about specific cases must involve only the Attorney General or Deputy Attorney General at the department and the counsel or deputy counsel to the President or Vice President at the White House. A parallel White House policy memorialized by counsels to the President over multiple administrations and directed to all White House staff contains similar restrictions on contacts with all departments and agencies. The incoming Attorney General would be well advised to continue to adhere to the White House contacts policy and to urge the White House counsel to do the same. In closing, public respect for the Department of Justice begins with public respect for the Attorney General. That respect comes from the impartial adherence to the rule of law, free from improper political influence. The Senate should ensure that the next Attorney General is committed to taking the steps to earn that respect.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you very much for allowing me to be here today. For a man from a small town in Florida whose father was a trucker and mom was a mail carrier, this is, being before the United States Senate, this is a true blue honor, so thank you for allowing me to be here. I know Pam Bondi. I've known her for about 35 years, and I've known her as a prosecutor. I've been her colleague, I've been her supervisor, she's been my supervisor, and I know her as the statewide prosecutor of Florida. And I hope to share with you a little bit today about what I know about Ms. Bondi professionally and what I know about her as a prosecutor and what I do know about her as how she will handle the job of United States Attorney General if you also decide. When it comes to criminal prosecution, Pam Bondi is unquestionably an ace. She did everything from batteries, DUIs, first-degree capital murder cases. She has experienced almost everything within the American justice system. From going to the scenes of these tragedies, to the courtrooms, to the witness rooms, holding hands with the victims of these crimes, Pam really has done it all. She appreciates the rules that make our criminal justice system the best in the world. And I wholeheartedly believe she will apply them and she will follow them. Ms. Bondi is a tenacious but a very thoughtful prosecutor. Crimes of violence upset her the most. She and I tried dozens of cases together before juries, including first-degree murders. Her level of preparation was simply outstanding. Her ability to connect with and speak to them on an understandable level was excellent. Juries loved her. Defense counsel respected her, and courts listened to her. It was clear that Ms. Bondi was there because she believed what she was doing. She believed in the case she was presenting. And she really did have that undefinable something that made everybody in the courtroom, juries, judges, maybe even defense lawyers sometimes, want her to succeed. She was excellent and still is. Ms. Bondi is tough. She quickly earned the title of career criminal prosecutor at a very young age due to her very clear feelings about repeat offenders and also her outstanding abilities in the courtroom. Her task was clear: prosecute the habitual offenders